to a brand new episode of Master Your Marriage. It was funny. We've been watching this show called Smoke on Apple TV.
Oh, gosh.
And it is, not that it's the world's greatest show. It just sort of sucked us in because it has a number of episodes. But it's interesting, and I want to explain just a little bit later in the podcast how the dynamic in this relationship is at least a little bit relevant, or I felt it was a little bit relevant to today's topic. So today we want to talk about something that destroys connection in almost every marriage and relationship we see, and I guess those we see on TV. And I'm guessing that it shows up in your relationships as well. It happens really fast. It feels automatic, and most of us don't even really realize that we're doing it until, well, it's too late. And then the conversation is just taking a left turn and it's gone off the rails. And truth be told, I think there are a lot of people who never really realize that they're doing it. Today, we're talking about defensiveness.
Oof.
Ooh,
what are you going to talk about later? You didn't even tell me you were going to bring that up today.
I just,
I'm kind of scared.
Sometimes just pull these things out. Hope they work.
Well, I know we've done a number of episodes on defensiveness over the years. There's a reason for that. It happens to be one of the most popular topics, actually, on the podcast. And it's also one of the most common problems that couples deal with, which is probably why it's one of the most popular topics.
Yep.
So today, though, I want to talk about defensiveness through an entirely different lens. I want to talk about defensiveness through the lens of self-worth and how defensiveness will be pretty hard to cure in your relationship if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself first.
We're currently in the middle of an entire series on shame and self-worth. And I know this probably sounds like a broken record here, but if you don't have a healthy sense of self, you can't have a healthy relationship with others, those around you. That's because how you relate to yourself has everything to do with how you relate to everyone that you connect with. Defensiveness happens when we act out of either one of two distortions of self-esteem. It's either one up or one down.
So I want to backtrack for just a minute and define what Robert's talking about, what one up and one down means, even though we've gone into a lot of detail about this in the last two episodes. I know some of you may not have heard those, so I want to kind of backtrack just a little bit. But I would highly recommend going back and listening to the last two episodes as a companion to this episode if you haven't yet done that. But self-esteem, having healthy self-esteem is being able to hold your own value as equal to everyone around you, but not more, not less. No one is greater than or less than. You know, I think one of the greatest lies that we've ever been told is that one person is more valuable than another person, or one race is more valuable than another, or one country, one gender, one person is better than another. And of course, this has been happening through all civilizations and probably throughout all of time, that we think that, for example, one race is less than human or less than another. But all of this is just a lie. It is not true. There is no one that is greater than or less than another.
Healthy self-esteem is being able to hold ourselves as same as who? Same as everyone else. The guy that's on death row, same value as you as a person. The president of the country, same value of you as a person. Self-made millionaire, also same value. That's because nothing that you can ever do can make yourself more valuable than another person. And there's nothing terrible that you can do that can make yourself less valuable as a human being. Value is inherent and unearned. It simply exists because, well, you exist.
So there are two distortions of self-esteem. The first distortion is shame. Shame is inferiority. It's feeling less than. It's feeling like you must shrink or accommodate, or that you're constantly having to prove your worth in order to be loved, in order to be worthy. And shame exists on a spectrum. It can start with maybe embarrassment. Then it might lead into feeling not enough. It might go on and continue into self-loathing, self-hatred. So there's extremes to it.
Yeah. So that's shame. And the second distortion is grandiosity. And it is the opposite of shame. This is superiority, or feeling better than, feeling entitled, dominant, above others, above the rules. This also exists on a spectrum ranging from arrogance to a lot of entitled superiority. Most of us bounce between these two distortions, which are shame and grandiosity, all day, every day, oscillating back and forth between accommodating and dominating.
Yeah. And that's because most of us were not esteemed properly as children. In my family, I'm going to share some stories today that I'm not particularly proud of, but in my family growing up, dominating was almost an admired trait. It was reinforced. And as a girl growing up, from the time I can remember, I was taught to stand up for myself, to be strong. And there's certainly ways to have gentle strength. That was not what I learned. So standing up for myself meant going into grandiosity. And that's what was modeled for me. And that place felt good to me. And if you think about it, being a fighter, which I was taught to be, I was raised to be, and I am a fighter. That's my first consciousness. My first instinct is to be a fighter. That gave me a sense of power. And that gave me a sense of superiority. And I don't think people talk much about, at least, how grandiosity actually feels good in that way, because it feels better than the opposite feeling, which is to feel small or to feel powerless or to feel embarrassed. And nobody wants to feel those things. I never really was able to learn how to be in the middle, same as, while still being able to have that sense of like gentle power. So one of the most regrettable, and actually I just shared this story with Robert yesterday for the first time in 35 years.
Yeah, I hadn't heard this story before.
Well, it doesn't make me look very good. It doesn't sound very good.
Fair enough.
So it's something I really regret growing up. I have a couple of stories like this where I was acting out of grandiosity and really hurt someone in my life. And this is one of them. So I was young. I was maybe junior high, maybe ninth grade. Gosh, I even still feel awful when I think about this. I feel kind of sick to my stomach. So I even thought, like, should I even share this story? But there was a boy at school that for some reason I just didn't like him. And I don't know, he probably said something that embarrassed me, that made me feel down. So I wanted to fight back. And one day, for whatever reason, after class, I decided I was going to fight him. And he didn't know I was going to fight him, but I decided I was going to beat him up. And I'm sure, being a boy, he didn't even fight back. And I approached him. I approached him in the hall, and I slapped him and punched him and kicked him and knocked him on the ground. And he just sat there on the ground, and I walked off, and I felt so powerful. I felt so good about myself. I felt so entitled because, again, that feeling of grandiosity feels good. And in the moment, you don't even feel bad about your bad behavior because you feel like that person deserved it. They deserve to be treated that way or talked to that way or punched in that way. And a lot of violence comes from that place of first falling into that, oh, I got a little embarrassed or a little shameful, so I'm going to spring back with grandiosity. And what's interesting is I don't think my parents ever even knew this story, but truth be told, if they found out, I don't even think I would have gotten in trouble because I was taught to be strong.
Yeah, I was probably not by your mom, right?
Right. Yeah, my dad would have not liked it, but my mom probably wouldn't have cared. Think to all, like I said, all the cruel things that I've done in my life, it's been in that same position of being grandiose, feeling like someone deserved it, and in that grandiose position, not really having any empathy or shame or remorse or just entitlement.
Yeah, I mean, think about, so as you're listening to this, and as I listened to this story, it was hard to hear. I was like, man, this is the woman that I married. I married a strong woman for a reason. Mm. And I did. And those were the qualities I liked. But if you think about, and if you've listened to the podcast for any time, you know that we talk a lot about our positions early on in our relationship, as Sharla was really good at contempt. And that is a symptom of this. And we had to spend a lot of time working through that.
I think it's just also, I'll just point out, like, we all have that part of us that exists. And we all have these parts. It's not who we really are. That's not who I see myself as today. And I don't think that's who I am. But that adaptive child part of us that exists, it's this part of our psyche. And every once in a while, it does come out. And, we have to learn to take that adaptive child part of us that learned these strategies growing up and put it in the back seat. Love it. Understand that it developed for a reason, and mine did. But it also needs to go into the back seat if we're going to have any sort of intimate, loving relationship.
Yeah. What's interesting is that shame and grandiosity are two sides of the same coin. They're rooted in the same emotion, contempt. And when we're in shame, we point that contempt at ourselves. And when we're in grandiosity, we tend to point that contempt at others. These two self-esteem distortions, they're not malicious. They're just both adaptations that we've learned in childhood as a result of the messages or the trauma that we experienced growing up. So we're taught how to be strong people. You were taught how to be a strong woman. You were taught how to fight back.
I really hope I'm not that person. But it is something that you will continually work on, because that adaptive child will always be part of your psyche.
Yeah.
It will always be something, just as if you fight and deal with shame and contempt towards yourself, that will be also something that you will constantly work on throughout life. And I was thinking, even if we didn't explicitly receive messages like I did, growing up, or the opposite, which is, shame messages of, you're not enough, you have to perform to be loved, things like that. Even if you didn't receive those messages growing up, society does a pretty good job of still socializing us into one of these two distortions. I would say, at least historically, women have generally been socialized a little bit more into the shame spectrum. Obviously not in my case, as my story illustrated, but I think throughout history, women have been socialized into self-diminishment, to put yourself last, put your husband first, your children first, and everyone else first, and self-sacrifice. And a lot of women that I work with come from more of a place of the shame side of the spectrum.
Yeah. And men, of course, we tend to be socialized. Again, not always. This is just painting with broad strokes here, but we tend to be painted a little bit more with the domineering grandiosity side of the spectrum. Like, oh, I won, And the problem is that neither position allows us to meet our partner or each other as equals. And if we're ever going to have true intimacy, true vulnerability, we need to get off of the seesaw of accommodation and domination.
Yep. So coming back to that story I just shared with you, unfortunately, I didn't feel guilt in the moment, because that's what grandiosity does to us. So even if you're just slightly into grandiosity, if you have a hard time feeling empathy for your partner, you're in grandiosity. You're one-upping. If you aren't feeling reasonable guilt, that's probably in the one-up. I didn't feel empathy. I didn't feel guilt right away. I did eventually, and didn't know what to do about it, because I was a kid. I'm like a 12, 13-year-old kid. And I think by the time I did feel guilt about it, I had probably lost track of the boy. I think we graduated from school or went off to a new school. And so I lost track of him. And when I think about what I did, like I said, I still feel sick to my stomach today, because I wish I could go back and be a kinder, more compassionate person. And I think that's the reason why I decided to share the story, even though I debated about it, was that I wanted to illustrate how grandiosity blinds us to the ways in which we hurt people. It really makes us ignorant of the ways in which we affect others, and it prevents us from feeling empathy. We need empathy. We need to feel guilt. Guilt is an important emotion, because without guilt, we feel righteous. We feel justified. We feel, on a smaller scale, obviously with our partner, that comment, they deserved it. They deserved it. I was entitled to say that. We tell ourselves that they deserve these things, even if it's minor, like just a little jab or, a snarky comment. And that's what the self-esteem distortion of grandiosity does to us.
On the other hand, if we have a healthy self-esteem, we can see the harm that we create in others by our actions. And we should feel bad about our bad behavior, because that provides us something very important for our relationships, a little bit of guilt and some remorse. But the guilt that we feel should not become shame. It should become proportionate to our behavior. In other words, we should feel bad about our behavior, but not bad about who we are as a human being.
So I think the thing that Robert said there is so important to reiterate, is that feeling guilty is important. It's necessary. We want to feel guilt without shame, because guilt is what triggers remorse, and remorse is what causes us to take accountability and to become better. So what does all of that have to do with defensiveness? Actually, it has everything to do with defensiveness.
Yeah. Defensiveness is a symptom of being in either of those two distortions, either shame or grandiosity. Defensiveness looks very different from each side of those two spectrums. One up defensiveness looks very different from one down defensiveness. But either way, we're so focused on ourselves that we honestly just don't know how to assess the impact we have on others. When we become defensive, we close our minds and our hearts to others. We reject our partner's perspective or even their honest feedback about how we are acting. And we prioritize protecting our ego over facing our hurtful behaviors, or at least facing the truth about our behaviors.
Yeah. And this is so costly in marriage because it sends this unspoken message that I cannot be trusted with your feelings. I cannot be trusted with your feedback because protecting my ego is more important to me than what it is you have to tell me or the feedback you have to give me. And if we can't look in the mirror, if we can't confront ourselves, if we can't see our behaviors and see ourselves honestly, a relationship cannot grow. It's going to stay stuck in those same old patterns where the adaptive child is running the show. So defensiveness prevents us from taking accountability and being able to see ourselves clearly.
So now let's talk about how we can spot it, because defensiveness doesn't always look the same. And it does show up differently whether we're coming from one up or one down. When it comes from the one up position, which is grandiosity, we're a pretty defensive jerk to be around. And the defensiveness is a lot more obvious. Let's say your partner gives you feedback about something that is, well, a little hard to hear. You might feel this quick flash of shame and embarrassment, but almost instantly you inflate your ego up into grandiosity as a defense mechanism. If they come at you what feels like a 10-pound cannonball, you hit back with a 50-pound one.
Robert just described what defensiveness can look like from the one up position, which again, more overt, more obvious, usually more of a counterattack. But defensiveness still happens from the one down position. It just looks different. It is usually because the person is already feeling so much shame. They already feel so bad about themselves as a person, either embarrassed or they're feeling less than, not enough, self-loathing. They're not feeling remorse, they're feeling shame, and there's a difference. And so they can't handle the feedback that they're receiving from their partner because it's just too painful for their partner to see them as flawed also. They already see themselves that way. So the defensiveness comes across different. It's still self-protective, but it's not as overt as coming from the one-up position. It sounds sometimes like, why are you always picking on me? Sometimes it's whiny like that, or why am I never enough for you? I can never do anything right here. That's one way that one down defensiveness can look. It can also look like just over-explaining. The partner might give some feedback and it's like, well, that's not what I was doing. Here's what I was really doing. And it's like trying to prove.
Yeah, let me tell you the truth. No, you don't understand. Let me keep telling you.
Trying to prove themselves, trying to prove their worth, trying to prove they didn't do anything wrong because they just can't handle their spouse as seeing them as less than. So even the one down person is still refusing to take in information, refusing to take in feedback. And that's still defensiveness. It's just defensiveness that wears a softer, more victim-like, shameful mask.
So back to the episode I was talking about in the beginning about smoke. And Sharla has no idea where I'm going with this, but in this relationship, the main male character he was an arson investigator, but he was really thinking he wanted to be an author and he wanted to write this book, and he felt really proud about this whole situation. And his wife, who they were struggling in their relationship, was a librarian, so she's very well read. And she had read his book. She told him it was good, but nobody else seemed to think his book is good. They're having this whole conversation because he forgot to pick her son up. And I'll speed it along, but he was like, yeah, dude, your son should just run home from school. It's fine. He's a cross-country runner. And that little slight, which wasn't very fair for him to say, and it wasn't very nice, she hit him with everything that was bad about his book. And you just watched him flip into just shame and anger. She went to grandiosity. She hammered him really quick. And then, of course, he went one down into shame. And then just like a light switch, he went straight up out of grandiosity. And then, the fight was on. But it's interesting and if you recognize that in your relationships where one comes with just a little slight, but it hits hard, it hits home, then you come back so fast and so hard. And that was pretty much the end of their marriage at that point, because she brought in the, whatever it is, the bunker buster.
Yeah.
That was it. How to blow up your relationship in one shot. That was
Yeah.
a master class on how to do it.
We should grab that clip and use it somewhere, because you're right. That is like the perfect illustration of the movement in the shame grandiosity cycle.
Yeah, it just went boom, boom, boom. And I went, 1, 2, 3. I watched it. So whether defensiveness comes from the one up or the one down, it's still very destructive because both sides refuse to take the truth in that would help their marriage grow. Both block repair and both come from the same root, which is being unwilling or unable to sit down and learn from their own imperfections.
So let's come back to the truth. Having healthy self-worth is the ability to feel proportionately bad about our bad behavior, which is the key word there is proportionately. We don't want to, we do one little tiny thing and we throw it way out of proportion into shame, right? We want to feel proportionately bad to what we did, while also simultaneously holding ourselves in warm regard that I am still valuable. My value is still unchanged. So I still have to hold that warm regard for me as a human and a flawed person, while still being able to take in and feel remorse at the same time. So it's being able to hold both of these spaces, isn't it? Which is difficult to do. And the truth is, we're all flawed people. We're all human and we're all making mistakes. Our partner is human and making mistakes. I am human and making many mistakes. But we're all having this very human experience, and we have to be able to feel remorse and hold our value at the same time.
Which is so hard to do because the world writ large is busy making people judgments on personal actions.
You're a worthless piece of, right? That's like the world.
Yeah.
How could you have done that?
Thing, you are, instead of, I can't believe that action happened from you.
Instead of that behavior that I did was wrong and let me make amends.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry Real says it very well. We need to become friends with our own imperfections.
I love that line.
That line has sort of stayed with us because the only way we can stay open to our partner's feedback is if we've made some kind of peace with the fact that we're imperfect. If we haven't, then any feedback feels like an attack on our soul, our very worth, and then we start to defend. I guess what he's saying here is that we need to be in what I like to call learning mode. So think about it this way. When you try to learn something new, you're genuinely seeking feedback to get better. You appreciate the feedback because the feedback makes you better. Maybe we need to have a bit more, quote, learning mode in our relationships. Like, I'm welcome to feedback. I just want to be a better partner. How do I learn how to avoid this defensiveness?
That's awesome. So today we want to give you an intervention for shame and grandiosity. I think this episode might go a little bit longer, but we really want to give you an actual tool today. So stick with us for a couple more minutes. This is the practical part of today's episode. And the first thing I think you need to realize is that you're not going to be able to intervene on defensiveness and do anything about it as long as you're still inside of your reactive, protective part of you. Yeah. That part, your adaptive part. You can only step out of defensiveness when you have that adaptive part kind of take that back seat, talk kindly to it though. Remember, love it. Recognize that it helped to protect you growing up, but have it take the back seat and bring out the wise part of you so that it can be in charge.
So the very first move every single time is to create just enough space to get out of reactivity and back into that part where you can actually choose. So take a few breaths, talk to your adaptive child the way we talked last week. Remind that little boy or child that you love them, but they need to take a back seat and let the adult handle the complex conversations.
Yep.
And if you need to step out of the room to get wise for a minute, just tell your spouse, hey, I just need a quick timeout so I can actually just be in my wise mind. I can think and I want to take in new information without being reactive.
And then here's the intervention. We need to come either up out of shame or we need to come down out of grandiosity so we can be same as. And so we're going to show you how to do that. So when you notice you're in shame, here's what I want you to try. I want you to reach down, either literally with your hands, reach down, scoop down to your feet, to wherever, or you can just do this in your mind's eye, in your imagination. But I want you to scoop down and bring yourself up into your body until you feel centered. and you're looking at level. So kind of like imagine bringing yourself up, because if you think about the body posture of someone who's in shame, they're usually slumped down below their eyeballs. So you kind of imagine bringing yourself up level and centered so that you're looking out your own eyeballs again, not above your partner, not below your partner, but same as your partner. And there's a mantra. You don't have to do the mantra if you feel uncomfortable with it, but I really like it. And I love adding it to this physical motion. So the mantra would be to say to yourself, I am enough and I matter despite blank. You get to customize that part at the end there. I am enough and I matter despite, and then whatever that thing that's making you feel shameful, name that, despite the fact that I just got fired from my job, despite the fact that I didn't do well on that interview, despite the fact that somebody just said something nasty to me. I am enough and I matter despite. And I've started using this quite often because that will also prevent that spring into that explosion into grandiosity for those who tend to come down and then bounce up.
Conversely, if you notice that you're sort of puffing up into this grandiosity or this one-up, reach up gently and pull yourself down into your body until you're centered and looking at level. Not above your partner, not below, but same as your partner. And the mantra for this is pretty much the same. Each person has inherent worth. No one more, no one less than.
Yeah. So there you've got like a physical gesture. It's like scooping down and pulling yourself, or reaching up and bringing yourself down. That paired with one of these two mantras, you're physically moving your body out of that old posture and back into sameness. And I know that sounds a little weird. I know when I first learned this, it sounded a little weird to me, but it actually works. Just making this small movement with your body interrupts the automatic pattern, the automatic defensiveness, and it does this faster than you would probably expect. And again, those two mantras are really helpful to say over and over anytime you feel yourself moving up or down. The first one, I am enough and I matter despite. The second mantra is each person has inherent worth, no one more, no one less. And so what I love about those mantras is they speak truth. They speak truth and they bring me back to the truth of who I really am, same as, equal to all who are around me.
Okay, this week we want to give you 2 practical things to work with. The next time you feel defensiveness rising, try the physical centering move with one of the mantras. Even if you only get halfway right, just notice what happens in your body and how you feel, and notice what happens to the conversation.
And then building on what we've been doing in this series, we started a noticing journal, if you remember, and we gave you some prompts each week with each episode of things to notice. So there's a few more things you could jot down this week if you're noticing and you're following along. The first would be to look at defensiveness. And when defensiveness shows up this week, jot down what triggered it. Did it feel more like it came from one up? So that you were more overt, more obvious, kind of striking back. You hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Not physically, right? We're talking about like verbally. You say something mean and nasty. I say something back more mean and nasty. Or was the defensiveness coming from more of the one down, kind of covert, withdrawing, whining, over explaining? And then notice, did I try any of the interventions that we shared today? And if so, what happened?
The goal isn't to never get defensive again. The goal is to start noticing it faster, recognize where it's coming from, and interrupt that pattern more often. To wrap up this episode, defensiveness is one of the most common ways that we try to protect ourselves. It's also one of the fastest ways that we hurt people that we love and keep our relationships from growing.
So every time you choose to pause, to center yourself, to move toward accountability and letting in truth and taking in information instead of defending, you're choosing your marriage over your old protection strategies. And that is how we strengthen our relationship muscles and mature our relationship.
Thank you for listening today. If this episode landed for you, we'd love if you shared it with someone who needs it. And as always, be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. It's the small things done often that create the biggest impact.
Until next time.